I'm Jim Collison, and live from the Gallup campus here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on May 20th, 2016. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you do have live questions during the webcast, we do have a live chat room. It's available for you right below the main video. And if you're catching us after the fact, we'd love to have you join us live. Keep track of everything that we're doing here. Gallup.eventbrite.com is the way to stay up with that. If you have questions, like I said, if you have questions after the fact, send us an email, coaching@gallup.com, or use the contact form right there on the live page. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center. There's GallupStrengthsCenter.com for all your coaching resources and StrengthsFinder training needs. You can also catch the video in both streaming and now downloadable audio for offline listening. Many of you are doing that. Our numbers are really, really good on the recorded side. If you want to do that to your phone and listen to it as you mow or you walk the dog or drive in the car or ride in the plane, you can do all those things. That, including our mobile apps, is available on our coach's blog, coaching.gallup.com. Dean Jones is our host today. Dean is the principal architect of Gallup's global client and learning strategy here at Gallup. I think I said that wrong, Dean, but I think they get the point. You're in charge of all smart things that we teach. Welcome to Call to Coach.
Yeah, thank you so much. I am somebody who works with an enormous amount of really smart, great consultants at Gallup and with many of our clients. My focus really is learning. So a lot of what I do is think about what we're teaching and when we're teaching it and how we're teaching it so that we can make sure it has the greatest impact around the world. So it's great to be here. I always love to be on Call to Coach. It's literally one of my favorite things to do. We do have the chat up, so if as we go through this, I would love to have your questions and comments. That's always just awesome for me. So this is actually going to be part 2 of the Call to Coach that I did, I think, 2 months ago, where we started talking about the path to strengths mastery. And I want to just kind of take a step back a little bit. It's been super cool for me to get all the feedback and the encouragement and the thinking and all the ways that you've been processing kind of the information that I shared on this last one. And I want to make sure that, it's great for me because I kind of hear how it goes in to everybody, and that both the things that land perfectly and the things that maybe misconceptions with that. So what I'd love to do is just take a step back and tell you what this is again and how we're thinking about it, and a little bit I think about what the utility of it is, and then I want to take the next step around it. So that's kind of my intent for today, okay? Spoken like somebody who's a course leader, right? I'm going to tell you what the agenda is for today. So first of all, we've been calling this the path of strengths mastery. It started really before about 5 years ago, I would tell you. So before we built in 2011, we built the new strengths coaching curriculum, the accelerated strengths coaching course, the 2-day successful strengths coaching for individual performance, and coaching managers and teams courses. Right, and it's a funny thing. We go back. I don't know how much longer I can continue to call it the new strengths coaching curriculum, given that it's 5 years old. Right, my friend Jim is nodding here.
It's been out there. Well, we do that all the time, though. It's the new, our new app.
Yeah, it's new. So anyhow, before we even started thinking about what we were going to teach in those courses, we got together a group of kind of our smartest thinkers around strengths development, right? People who coached and had been coaching for decades, people that had been leading our courses around strengths and had been doing that for a long time, people that were thought leaders and researchers around that. So kind of got that group together and said, gosh, tell us what the process is. Like help us understand what is the process from the point that somebody starts to get introduced to strengths to the point that we would say, man, that person is masterful, right? By the way, a little plug, if you've never read the George Leonard book on mastery, it's one of my personal favorites. Every time I talk about mastery, I think about that book, right? But so we were thinking about, gosh, what's that continuum, from that first pass exposure, first blush exposure to strengths to what we would consider mastery, and what's that road look like, right? Or what's that progression kind of look like? And we know it's different in every person, right? It goes in every person goes through a different kind of progression, but what we were looking for is what are the things as practitioners that we would say are commonalities. One of the things that we know is the more we think about it and the more that as we start to understand it, helping those of us who day in, day out train and lead people around strengths to be able to recognize, gosh, these are the signposts along the way, and here's where you go, here's how this goes, makes us all better, right? So what could we start to say about that? And initially, we came up with actually 9 kind of milestones that we would say, gosh, we could all agree those were things that we were looking at. Recently, we finished the curriculum, so we based the curriculum, and it really, if you look at the accelerated course or the 3 two-day strengths coaching courses, they really encompass the first 4 milestones on that journey, or the first kind of 3 to 4, and then we kind of poke at some of the milestones that are kind of further down the road, right? And that we see kind of a little later. So really the accelerated course, we wanted to be able to say, gosh, it's that first kind of, the first 4 that we say, gosh, if you got these, you got them right? And I talked about those first 3 really on the last webcast that they did. So what is this really? So we kind of consider this a little bit of a meta conversation about our strengths coaching curriculum and about our strengths development curriculum. So it's sort of, if you don't know what a meta conversation is, it's really the conversation about the conversation. It's like, what is the structure behind it, or what's the way of thinking about it? It's really the meta conversation, right? It's really about how are we thinking about it and approaching the curriculum that we're building. And we've been revisiting it a lot lately over the last several months, I will tell you, because as we think about the advanced strengths coaching course that we're going to start piloting at the CliftonStrengths Summit. By the way, if that sounded like a shameless plug, it was. No mistaking there. I can't get anything past anybody, right? So we've been thinking about that one-day course, and one of the things we want to do is really start to visit this stuff in some more detail and give it to all of you as coaches, right? So this is really the conversation, and really the utility of it is you really understanding what sits behind the course. So last time I talked about really 3 of the first kind of early milestones, right? Understanding, awareness, and appreciation. Those were really the first 3 that we started to talk about. And in fact, that we know if you think about name it, claim it, aim it, if you think about the 4 coaching conversations we gave you in the accelerated course, what sits behind you are those milestones. What sits behind that so that you've got awareness of, does somebody have sufficient understanding? Do they have basic awareness? Do they have a sufficient level of appreciation? And then they can start to invest in that. So that's kind of what sits behind the thing, right? The idea is for you as a coach, the more you start to be able to recognize these and distinguish these milestones, the more facility you're going to have as a coach to be impactful. You'll recognize this. And some of them kind of, I will tell you, I think it may be overstating a little bit, but they show up a little like crises, right? Like there's a tension between them. And we'll talk about that more today as we go through it, but there's a certain piece where it's like we're resolving something, and in resolving it kind of catapults us forward. So as I said, the idea is as we get through this, by the way, there's more. So we started with 9 that we had kind of posited before we built the strengths coaching curriculum. We think there's more than 9 now as we've been building this out and thinking about it. We think there's more than 9. I think some people took away from my comments, and I apologize about this, from my comments last time that there's only 6 milestones or whatever it is. There's not only 6, right? So just so you're clear, there's not only 6. We're also trying to resist in some ways pinning these down like these are the, like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 7 stages of grief, right? Like you go, we don't want this to be kind of a linear thing or something that it feels like it's empirically derived, because it's not. It's more of a construct that we think is derived from the qualitative understanding of our practitioners, and something that doesn't feel super linear. But at the same time, being able to distinguish it and understand it gives you some power as you're working as a coach with the people that you're coaching. So that's the intent here around this, right? And we think that as you start to use this and teach us, okay, this is what I see, and like that, that you'll start to be able to show us, okay, how that works. JB, I love what you said because you kind of cued me on the next thing I want to say. So I started last time by talking about understanding, awareness, and appreciation, and I want to go back and just revisit those briefly. One of the things that's the funniest thing I will tell you, and I said this on the last Call to Coach, but I want to say it again because I think it's really important, is sometimes people relate to, do I understand my strengths profile? Do I have basic awareness of my strengths in action? And do I appreciate them? Do I have a sort of a sense of self-love or self-acceptance around them, right? Sometimes people deal with those first three like, hey, check, 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 I'm through that stage, I'm done. And one of the things that we know, and we know as people that work around development, is, man, you just end up going back to those time and time again. So in people's strengths development, it's not like, hey, I got that understanding and I'm done. It's like, gosh, when I've plateaued in my development of my talents into strengths, one of the best ways to go kind of break it all open again is to go back and say, okay, what do I understand now that I didn't understand before, right? How do I unpack these themes further? It's one of the reasons I will tell you, Jim Clifton, our CEO, always says, weaknesses don't develop and strengths develop infinitely, right? And one of the reasons we say that strengths develop infinitely is because those themes, you can continue to just keep unpacking those themes. So one of the ways that you can catalyze growth if you've plateaued in the way that you're developing your strengths is to go back to these first to be able to say, gosh, what do I understand now that I didn't understand before? Or what might I be missing in terms of my understanding? Where am I aware of now? What do I see in myself or my utilization of strengths utilization of my talents that I didn't understand before? And where are the things that I'm resisting who I am? What are the things where I don't really have a deep appreciation of my contribution, and where am I resisting kind of who I am fundamentally? And that, we know as you go back and again to be able to continue to develop your strengths over your strengths journey, you're going to revisit that. It's the funniest thing. I think it must be that I hang out with a bunch of parents, but I've literally had 3 people over the course of the last month, as I've kind of talked about this, say it's just like the game Chutes and Ladders. You climb up and then you take the chute and you're back, and going back through that, but going back through it at a different level. It's a little like the Zen concept of the beginner's mind, right? So where you're always kind of going back to the beginning, you're kind of going back to the foundation. So I want to revisit those 3, and then I want to give you 4 more that we're thinking about and playing around with, just for you to take under advisement, right? So the first was understanding, and we really talked about that as being really having, being able to say, do I know what the themes are? Right? So when somebody says I'm high in competition or I'm high in deliberative, do I know what that means? Right? Do I actually know what that means? And do I know what that means in terms of, do I start to understand what are all the traits that live inside of that theme? So what are all the patterns of thought, feeling, or behavior, all the talents that live inside that I can start to understand? And one of the things we know, both as individuals who are developing their strengths and as coaches who are helping others to be able to develop mastery, is to be able to have that deep knowledge of what we mean by understanding. And so, as to be able to really unpack the themes. Many times, I will tell you, I see people that are starting to master their strengths, or people that are coaching others, don't necessarily have a very deep understanding of the diversity or the breadth of traits in each theme. So they know the theme by 1 or 2 traits, and it becomes one-dimensional, like a label, right, or like a box, which obviously is sort of antithetical to development, as opposed to really understanding the breadth of the traits in the theme. So it's really important, I think. Some of the best coaches I know are ones that really understand the whole kind of 3-dimensionality of that. I think of Michael Dauphiny, who's one of my favorite coaches and one of my favorite people, who really has that whole understanding of the breadth of the talent themes, because he's just coached so many people and seen them in life, right?
Dean, can you give real quick just a few
Yeah.
suggestions as coaches want to dive into that? What are some resources available to them, or the best ways you've known, or is
Yeah.
it just practice, or can you just give a quick little primer on that?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no problem. Yeah. One of the things I will tell you is go back and read the theme descriptions. Go back and read the standard theme descriptions. It's funny, like you go back and you remember that each phrase, each sentence in there is a trait, is a unique trait. So one way to be able to do that is that, right? The other piece is, Jim, is experience, is coaching people and seeing how it comes to life. I think sometimes, for all of us as coaches, we're trying to get rid of that filter that we listen through so we can really listen, we can really hear people. But really listening and being curious about how does the theme arise in each unique person. As you coach people, as you work with people, it's like, it's fascinating. There's a lot of people I work with who are high focus. I'm focus number 2. I should have said my top 5 are activator number 1, focus number 2, woo number 3, strategic number 4, and relator number 5. So I have woo and relator in my top in my top 5. I have focus and activator or my 1 and 2, right? So if it seems like I'm a study in contradictions, that would be accurate. So anyhow, but I think really being able, as you work with people, to really see how it arises in people and being really curious about that, right? I think those are things. The other thing, and my buddy Paul Allen did this, and I think it's great. Is he used to travel with the theme insight cards, and he literally memorized the theme insight cards. And as he was out to master strengths. So I think traveling with your copy of the theme insight cards or your copy of StrengthsFinder 2.0, I think those are great ways to be able to do that. And so like that. So that's understanding. Awareness, awareness is really having that basic awareness that you're cultivating in somebody, that basic awareness of their themes. So part of your gauge, I think, always as a coach is when you're working with somebody is to be able to say what is their real awareness. And you can say that this process of strengths development is really a process of self-awareness in many, many ways. And JB, I love your comment. I'm going to come back to your comment in a minute here. JB, but it's that process of self-awareness, and I think one of the things early on as you're working with a client to be able to sorry, I keep getting it. It's Sherry Kruger. I love that you just put your theme insight cards in your bag. Thank you. That's so sweet of you to say that. That's great. So as you're working on that process of awareness, there's really 2 dimensions, right? And part of it is you start to work with people that you're coaching. Part of it is starting to gauge early on what is their self-awareness, what is that level of self-awareness, what can I count on, how well do they know themselves, how well do they see themselves in action, because you're working around that. I will tell you, as you start to work with folks inside of their awareness of their talent themes, and to develop those into strengths, the first level is being able to say, okay, yeah, I'm an activator. Can I think of a time yesterday, last week, when I used my activator, I could see my activator in action, right? That's a fairly simple thought process, right? I understand, and we're testing, do I understand activator, and can I pick it out in my life? A more complex thought process to be able to say, hey, think about yesterday, or think about the decisions you made yesterday, the experiences you had, the choices you made. Now, how are those given by your themes? That's a deeper level of awareness, right? I was with one of the people that works in our she's one of our strategic analysts, and she's also an industrial psychologist. We were talking about how it's the difference between recall and recognition, right? Recognition is not as complex a thought process as recall is. So that level of awareness is the same thing. So helping people to build that awareness of the themes and actions so they can see how their life is given by those themes. And to your point, JB, one of the things that we know is that one of the things we say, one of the foundations of talent is we know that who we are, how we see the world is always given by a filter. It's always good. We're always biased. We're always looking at the world through a particular paradigm or framework that arises in language, but the more we become aware of it, the more we can transcend it. So we're never going to escape that we're given by our talents. But the more we become aware of them, the more we can transcend that, and we have really access to everything. It is a curse to be able to say, gosh, I am an activator, but I don't know that I'm one. Or I'm a competitive person, I'm high in competition, but I don't know I'm high in competition. If I'm high in competition and I don't know it, I just think the world is divided into winners and losers, and I don't understand why those losers don't get with the program, right? And if I don't realize that about myself, I'm constrained by that. But if I realize that, then I can harness it. Because I have self-awareness, I can harness it in ways that are really powerful, where I can contribute it on a whole other level. And the process of development was really that ongoing process of self-awareness. So there's that piece, right? That's the second piece. The third is appreciation. And oftentimes when we're talking about appreciation, I didn't really talk about it this way when I was on our last Call to Coach. But appreciation really has a sister, which is acceptance, right? And so with appreciation, it's really appreciation and acceptance together. So do I have an appreciation for my strengths? It starts, the ground of it really is, do I accept who I am fundamentally, right? Do I accept that this is who I am, and by extension who I'm not? Do I really own that this is who I am and this is who I'm not? And then do I have an appreciation for it? So I've got that sort of element of self-love, right? I really see what my gift is to the world, right? I can start to recontextualize or understand in a new way who I am as a self, right? How I'm wired. And it helps me to be able to see the contribution that I am. I can't tell you the number of people that I've had come up to me and say, gosh, when I got my strengths report and I talked with a coach, things that I thought were negatives about me, I saw the contribution that they were, and I never saw that about myself before. And you all, as successful coaches, probably have had that experience a million times, where people say, gosh, this gives me a whole new access. It is part of why we talk about strengths and strengths development as transformational. Is instead of perpetually trying to fix something about ourselves, we understand it in a new context, we understand it in a new light, and it gives us access really to the contribution that we are. Right? So, and that's why it's so powerful. It starts, though, with self-acceptance. I don't know about you, but certainly I've had people in the courses that I've led and in the coaching sessions that I've delivered who have said, who don't accept who they are, right? Or they don't accept their strengths. Their relationship with the report is wrong, right? Or the report is 80% right and 20% off. Right? And sometimes people go down that road where it's like, I'm going to do the assessment 14 times until they get it right, right? And I don't want to leave. I don't want to say that we're empirically accurate 100% of the time. I'm sure there's some there's circumstances, right? But in a lot of the cases, what we're dealing with is a self-awareness gap there, right? Or a self-acceptance gap. In a lot of ways, it's really coming to terms with who are you fundamentally, and you can't really develop beyond that. So that one is kind of a turning point, right? With each one of these things, and that's why we think they're important milestones. Is gosh, with appreciation and acceptance, if I don't accept who I am, if I don't really fundamentally appreciate who I am, man, it's hard to develop beyond that, right? It's kind of like, it sounds funny, but, I grew up in a family that has incredible musical talent. My mom, who recently passed away, had perfect pitch, right? I mean, she was just an incredible pianist, right? And I grew up with this talent where, my siblings have great musical talent. I have literally no musical talent. I'm very enthusiastic, right? So when I go to church and I sing in church, I'm very, very enthusiastic. And so, but and there's a part where I wish I had musical talent, right? And I would just try to figure out, okay, is there any way this is going to go? And there's a point where you have to just say, you know what, I don't, and that's okay. And I love that, and I love myself for it, right? And I can be enthusiastic about it, but it's not going to change that this is not an area where I'm gifted. And so you can't start to develop past it when somebody's out to pursue that thing that they just don't have. So each one of these foundational ones, and I think that's why they're so important: understanding, awareness, appreciation, and acceptance. Gosh, you got to have those, and it's one of the reasons that when you're in a plateau and you want to go catalyze development again, you go back to those things again, right? To be able to kind of go and take a deeper cut at those around that. So those are the first three that we kind of talked about, right? The next, there's four of them that are kind of next, and honestly, I tell you, we discuss and debate them all the time as we think about this as practitioners, and so I want to give them to you. I would caution you from saying, gosh, they belong in a particular linear order, or they've got to be in a particular way. I want to give these to you. They're a set of pairs. You may have heard some of them before. Because we kind of tease a couple of them in the accelerated course. But I want to kind of talk to you about them. And again, we're starting to call these developmental milestones. So the idea is they're not linear, but you do, like when you're coaching somebody and you see one of those, you can start to recognize it, like, oh yeah, that's something that people deal with at that stage, or that's something that's something you deal with, right? So I'm going to go through each one of these four, okay, and kind of talk about each one of these, and let me know, your questions, comments. I love watching the chat as we go through this. So the first one is what we call focus/investment. Focus/investment, right? And it's that point where, as somebody has kind of understanding, awareness, and appreciation, that they start thinking about, how am I going to start to focus on my strengths? And it's that choice that they made. It's not just like, hey, like I know what my strengths are. For some people, I will tell you, great people don't really get here because they sort of understand what their strengths are, they appreciate them like that, but they don't start to do that thing where they start to focus on what their strengths are and start to intentionally invest in their strengths. So it becomes that kind of conscious decision that says, gosh, I'm going to focus on my own talent themes and the application of my talents and the development of my talents and the strengths, and I'm going to embrace those. So I'm really going to invest myself. I'm really going to focus myself. I'm going to bring myself to bear on those talent themes and utilizing those talent themes, developing those talent themes. Our strengths formula that we give you in the accelerated course is talent times investment, which is knowledge, skills, experience equals a strength. Right? And so it's that intentionality around it that says, hey, look, I'm going to start to focus in this area. Part of it is, and that we see there, part of it is, along with that, is this notion of giving up being a well-rounded person. So you got to, at that time, be able to stop protecting your weaknesses. You got to stop, at that point, you got to stop, arguing for your non-talents. You have to sort of embrace all that. So focusing on your strengths also means understanding and embracing your weaknesses. It also means understanding what are your non-talents and being okay with those. You kind of have this kind of peace, this acceptance. I don't have to be excellent at everything, and I've got the opportunity to be great in these areas, right? So we know the difference between talent and strength. Strength is really synonymous with performance excellence. Our standard definition of strength is consistent, near-perfect performance in a particular area. So as we develop talents into strengths, we're looking at how do we invest in those areas of talent. How do I focus on those areas of talent and invest in those areas of talent to be able to have them turn into strengths where I can point to performance, I can point to results around that, right? So the question really at this time is, how am I going to start to invest in those? And I will tell you, as coaches, I think that's one of the areas that is both tough for people and where your coaching is valuable. I think people will go, many people say philosophically, I agree, I'd like to invest in my strengths. I agree, I think that these are areas, but how do I do that? I think for a lot of people, they don't know what does it really mean to invest in my strengths, and to start to be intentional and kind of strategic about how do I start to do that? What are the pieces of knowledge that, when added to my talent themes, will start to yield strengths? What are the skills I should develop, and what's the kind of practice I should have? What is the set of experiences? In other words, what's the investment that I need to make to turn my talents into strengths? And so that's I think where coaching really becomes very meaningful, where there's a ton of traction. Is people may be aligned with you. Yes, I want to be able to do this, or intentional, or have good intentions about it, right? But they don't know exactly what to do or how to go there. Right? How do I get started? And that's a powerful part as coaching, right? I also think, and it's interesting, as we talk about using your strengths and using your strengths on the job and like that, I think some people have the misapprehension that we mean that like you should be in a job all the time where you're using 100% of your talent themes every day. And in fact, we know that if you have a job where you can use 35 your talent themes 35% of the time, that's pretty good, right? And developing your strengths is how do I move from 35 to 50, and how do I move from 50 to 70? So how am I developing that over time so that as I start to invest and I start to utilize my talents, that more and more of my job becomes around that, right? So that's this whole notion of focus and investment, right? And you can start to see it's a point that people get to where they've got to kind of consciously choose. And part of it, by the way, as a coach, may be kind of forcing that choice for people. So helping people as they arise to, they may say, gosh, I just love my strengths. I love thinking about my strengths. I love thinking about all these talent themes. I understand them, and I love seeing them in action, right? It's another thing to go to say, okay, now I'm going to start to focus there. Now I'm just going to start to invest in those, because they can't legitimately be strengths until you invest in them. That's kind of the hard truth. The next one in the 4 is what we call application and strategy, right? So as I start to apply my talents intentionally, right? As I start to do that intentionally, how do I start to apply those intentionally? And then how do I start to what starts to arise is strategies for being able to use those in a way that produce my intended results. Excuse me. It's kind of like conscious competence, right? Now that I'm aware of my talents, now that I've chosen to focus on them, how do I intentionally start to apply them so that I can deliver predictable results? If we say strengths are consistent, near perfect performance, consistent is part of it, right? It becomes predictable. So I know I use my activator, I use my focus in ways that are intentional and predictable, and I start to get kind of strategic about it, right? So I know what the strategies are for being able to help me to be able to use these, and I'm conscious of those strategies, and I'm intentional about those strategies so that it helps me to be able to use my talents in meaningful ways that produce predictable, consistent, world-class kinds of results. So, and what you start to see as somebody starts grappling with this is they're conscious about the application and they're building skill in the application of their talents, right? So they're starting to consider all the issues of skill, right? And am I practicing enough? Am I good? Am I doing this in the right way? My results are not yet predictable, right? What is my awareness? Oh, I got caught off guard by this, right? All those things that we would say around, as I apply my talents meaningfully, all those things that start to arise. And what we start to have an understanding of is, gosh, what are the strategies I use to set myself up for success? Like for me, I'll give you an example from me. One of the things about me, this is where, I am clearly a handicapped human being. If you look at my top 10, I have one lonely relationship theme. You look at my top 15, I've got 2, right? I have relator is my number 5, and positivity is way, way down at number 15, right? So if I look at that, like I just don't, I'm a guy, it seems like I'm so extroverted, it seems like I got a lot of relationship themes, but one of the big epiphanies for me is that what seems like relationship themes with me, a lot are influencing themes. I got a ton of influencing themes. So, it was a huge epiphany. I'm always like, hey, I'm a people person. No, I'm an influencing person, right? And one of the things that was a huge epiphany for me was as I started to apply my talents in really intentional and meaningful ways was to know that, hey, to build relationships, I got to really use that relator. I got to work that relator really, really, really hard. And so, for me, as I work with a team, the best strategy for me is one-on-one first. So developing one-on-one relationships with each person and letting that aggregate up into then my relationship with the team. If I build all those one-on-one relationships, it's easier for me because that's the most comfortable, most meaningful way to be able to build relationships. By the way, I didn't get that tip. I didn't discover that on my own. I got some coaching from the great Gail Moeller. For those of you who don't know, Gail is no longer with us, but Gail was one of our senior scientists, one of our senior leaders in our organization, really brilliant, and really was behind the World Poll. So Gail was a mentor to many, many, many of us at Gallup, and he, in a conversation with him, he was the one that helped me to be able to suss that out, a coaching conversation, to kind of suss that out, and it really was, again, for me, it helped me to be able to resolve that crisis around, or that notion around, how do I apply my talents in a meaningful way? How do I come up with strategies that are going to help me succeed around that? One of the things that's cool, we were talking about this the other day with a group of coaches. Mara Hoogerhouse, many of you guys know. Mara is one of our learning and development consultants, and she works with companies around the world. She said it reminds me of this Deepak Chopra quote. Deepak is one of our senior scientists. Deepak tweeted, and I thought this quote was just great: "Intention is the active partner of attention. It is the way we convert our automatic processes into conscious ones." Let me say it again. Intention is the active partner of attention. It is the way we convert our automatic processes into conscious ones. And I think that captures exactly this kind of milestone in really a perfect way, is starting to be intentional, right? And turning our attention to our themes and how we apply them, and then what starts to arise then is strategies, around that help us to be conscious about and predictable about the kind of results that we want to produce. So that's sort of kind of developmental milestone. So the first one was focus and investment. The second one was application and strategy. The third is one that you may be aware of because we reference it in the accelerator course. We kind of scratch the surface on it, but we don't go super deep, and that's that tension between self-expression and self-regulation. So one of the things you see this, and when I think about this one, I always think about executive leaders. You see this in a lot of leaders. But as somebody then is using their strengths, they're applying their talent themes in really meaningful ways, they're developing strategies, one of the things is that kind of balance between self-expression and self-regulation, right? I'm fully self-expressed, right? But in being fully self-expressed, I may step on somebody else's toes or trip myself up in them, right? So I've got to self-regulate in some ways. So there's that tension that goes back and forth between full, authentic, great expression of my talent themes, right? Here I go. I'm going to be a big person, right? I'm going to fully express all my talent in ways that are meaningful and, excite me, and, that where I can really contribute. And at the same time, I got to manage, okay, is this, am I contributing in ways that don't trip up other people? Am I contributing in ways that don't derail myself? And how do I do that? Or am I over-regulating, right? So, I think of a time, actually last August for me, where I could see, I got scared, and I wasn't expressing my talent in the big way that I know that I could, right? I was over-regulating in the way that I did, that I was expressing my talent and my strengths, right? So there's that tension between self-expression and self-regulation. And we talk about that, the way we talk about in the accelerated courses is through the Johari window. I think that framework, time-honored framework, that started, I think it was invented by those gentlemen in the mid-50s. But it is one of the fundamental frameworks for understanding self-awareness. I think at some point in the future we'll just do a call to coach session just on the Johari window, because I get lots of questions about it, and lots of people want to talk about it. But I think it's great because you inside of that, you see it is that tension, right? How do I be fully self-expressed? How do I be in the open area? What are the blind spots, that I need to suss out, that I need to sort out? By definition, blind spots are areas that you don't see, right? If you see it, it's not a blind spot. It's just something it's not a blind spot. It's a failing. And then what are those areas that are risks, areas where I'm not really expressing myself, where I'm holding myself back, around that. So we sometimes talk about, and Kurt Liesfeld loved to talk about the transition from taking raw talents to mature talents. I think this self-expression, self-regulation thing, this tension between those two things is a big part of it, right? So how do I make sure I'm not throttling too down on it? How do I do I'm not letting the throttle out too far, right? And part of it is in this area, my relationships with others. Don in Soar With Your Strengths talked about how the value of that strengths really develop in relationship with other human beings, and this is where I will tell you it is a particularly powerful milestone where you see that feedback becomes so important. Right, for me to help understand, gosh, when I'm expressing myself, right? When I'm expressing myself, how's that landing for you, right? Is it landing consistent with my intention? I had an intention to land that. I had an intention to contribute that. How's that landing for you, right? Or when I step into it and inadvertently derail you or others or myself, right? How's that for you, right? So that I get that great feedback, so that certainly that feedback helps me to recalibrate, to be able to say, how do I walk that line? And I will tell you again, this is one where as you develop your talents into strengths, as you continue to do that, you go back time and time again to say, okay, what's that balance between self-regulation and self-expression, right? As I take a new job, or I go to another level, or expand the scope of my impact, right? How do I do that, right? And how do I find that sweet spot there, right? And so that is really useful. And I think it's one of those things that over time, that process and the partnerships you develop around that process, and the relationships you build, and the calibration that you discover around that, all becomes super important. Okay. By the way, as I'm going through this, I'm seeing some of the comments. If you do have questions as we go through this, I'm going to do the last one, and then I want to kind of come back, and I'd love to take your questions. I'd love to address any of your comments around this. So just go ahead and type them in, and then we'll come back, and I'll make sure that I get as many as we can in this session, right? So that's self-expression, self-regulation, right? Last one that is a developmental milestone is this notion of managing weaknesses and building partnerships, right? Managing weaknesses and building partnerships. So the more managing non-talents and weaknesses and building partnerships, right? So the more I intentionally use my strengths, the more this interesting thing starts to happen, right? Where I talked earlier about that I come to terms with my own non-talents, right? So I start to see those areas, and instead of protecting that or defending that or excusing that or anything else that kind of goes with it, right? I can really accept, like my number 34 is harmony, right? I am never going to be the guy that walks into the room and says, I can really see the consensus in the room. I am not a consensus builder, right? It's just not my thing. So you kind of come to terms with those pieces, and you start to be able to see, gosh, what are my non-talents, and then what are my weaknesses? What are the ways where either my non-talents or my strengths get in the way of the kind of contribution that I'm out to deliver there, right? And as a result, I start to get really interested in other people's talents and strengths. I start to get really interested in the ways that I can borrow somebody else's harmony, or I can borrow somebody else's strength around understanding and being able to read a group. I can borrow somebody else's empathy to be able to say, gosh, how do I understand that? And so I get really interested in other people's talents, other people's strengths, and the way that they use them. And so it sort of naturally arises that I get clear about my own talents and strengths, and I start to value other people's talents and strengths in a new and meaningful way. Part of it is being able to say things, like, hey, look, if you're counting on consensus, I'm not your guy, right? That I can own that for myself. I'm not your guy. Not like an excuse, not like a rationalization or a justification, but Hey, let's get my friend Jim, because my friend Jim's going to help us with that, right? So I know you're not going to help us with that.
I might. I might.
You might, yeah, you might, yeah, exactly. But I can say the things like, what are the things that are just not me, right? What are those things that trip me up? What gets in the way, right? So I can start to see that. And Barbara, you asked a question. What are some ideas to help those who are in the resistance stage? First of all, I think at a fundamental level, and that's a great question. I love that question. First, it's at a fundamental level, you got to help people to understand that, like, you got to get them grounded in this, that we're all uniquely gifted, and we all don't have the same level of intensity in all 34 themes, right? And so none of us have, are at 100% of all 34 themes, right? And in fact, that our unique configuration of our top 5 is 1 in 33 million. So, and our unique configuration of our top 10 is exponentially more unique, right? So, so helping people really understand that and start to embrace that. The other thing, and I will tell you, I see this a lot with people that are managers and leaders, that they've got a real hunger and commitment to excellence at the end of the day, most of them, right? How do I be better? In fact, how do I be great? How do I be world class? There's an appetite, I think, in many, many leaders and many managers around how do I continue to improve myself, and in fact, how do I achieve greatness? The pathway to greatness is through your talents. It is through developing your talents into strengths. That's the pathway to greatness. We know that is the way. If you want to be world class, that you start getting very, very interested, very committed to your talents and the development of your talents into strengths. So I think that helps people. One is to be able to say, hey, what does that mean then? And being able to kind of let go, part of the self-awareness milestone, as we embrace those areas that were great, to be able to say, hey, do you have the same level of acceptance, like a challenge, right? Do you have the same level of acceptance about the things that you're not great at? Right? And are you willing to be as public about those things as you are about the things that you're great at? Be able to have the same essentially level of recognition around that, and part of greatness is knowing how to utilize people. I tell you, I work with the gentleman that I work with at Gallup. His name is Phil Rollman. He's our Chief Communications Officer. He's also a gentleman who's led a lot of behind a lot of the initiatives at Gallup that have grown the strengths movement, right? And somebody that we all love a lot. I will tell you, Phil will tell you of all the accomplishments he's had in his career and all the great things he's done. The thing he's probably most proud of is being able to figure out who's the right person for the job and putting together teams of people that can work together to accomplish something, right? So it's not about, hey, I did this or I did this. It's that I'm good at being able to pull people together, right? And I think that it's a great leadership model for a lot of leaders and executives to be able to say, hey, look, it doesn't have to be all me, right? But really, my gift is really knowing where am I great, and then being able to pull in others to be able to be able to compensate for those areas where I don't have talent or have weaknesses, right? And so, yeah. Luke, I love what you just added there. That's great. I'm going to just read this, Luke, because I just love this. Luke Ramsey said, I used to come to a room and say, I'm weird, and therefore I don't belong with this group. And now I say, I'm weird, and therefore I have something to add to this group. I love that, right? There is a case to be made for let your freak flag fly, right? How are you unique? How are you valuable? What do you have to contribute? For me, going back to kind of recontextualizing who you are, going back way as we talk about appreciation and acceptance, for me, my sense of urgency, my impatience, my desire for action, I'm activator number 1, was always something I thought I needed to control. It is something I need to control, but it's also a huge contribution, and I didn't until I did the CliftonStrengths Finder and started working with a coach around that. It wasn't something that I really saw the huge contribution that can be. So let me just kind of recap here. Let me recap. So the first 3 kind of developmental milestones that we talked about last time and we kind of reviewed today are understanding, awareness, and we kind of consider that kind of basic awareness because we know this whole process is one of self-awareness, and then appreciation, and embedded in that is appreciation and acceptance, right? Self-acceptance. Then the four that we introduced today here are focus and investment, right? Focusing on my strengths and then starting to consciously invest in those areas of strengths. Huge opportunity for us, I think, as coaches, right? The second is application and strategy. Am I starting to apply my talents in meaningful ways to develop strengths? And am I starting to then develop that kind of conscious competence, if you will, around being able to have strategies for being able to develop predictable kind of performance or predictable kind of results. Then self-expression, self-regulation. We talked about the tension between those two. How do I fully express my talents and my strengths in ways that are meaningful? How do I also regulate them? And the last one then is managing non-talents and weaknesses and building partnerships. Right. So how am I doing that in ways that are powerful for me, where I have that great understanding of what my non-talents and weaknesses are, embrace those, and I'm able to leverage others around me to be able to be well-rounded. Barbara Stewart, your comment, could it be that resistance is also an element of fear? If I know my strengths and know that investing in them provides the pathway to greatness, I may resist as I would take away the excuses and my life might change significantly. This could be scary to people. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, it's one of those things, there are environments where people need to be self-protective. I think that we can't be naive about it as coaches. There are environments where people are expected to be well-rounded, and where if you show weakness or you show that there's an area that you don't have covered, we don't want to be naive about that, right? It's part of this and part of coaching is really understanding the environment that the person lives in. Whether that's a corporation, whether that's a small business, whether they're an independent practitioner, whether they're inside of a faith community, whether they're inside of an educational institution, really understanding what is the environment, what's the culture of that environment, right? And so it would be naive to say, hey, look, to coach someone to say, hey, show up and start the meeting by talking about all the things you're bad at. Now, in some cultures that might be liberating. In some cultures that may be just, like driving off a cliff, right? So, it's important for us to be able to really understand what is that environment, so people can work their way there in a way that is powerful for them. The other thing is that it's really where self-awareness is a journey. Everybody moves at a different pace, so it's not like we all develop. It's important to know developmentally we're all on our unique path. And we're all moving at a different pace. And people gestate at different rates and in different ways. And it's not always a consistent path either. So, people have growth spurts, right? And people have plateaus. And that's all okay. And as part of it is just being able to understand kind of who people are and what they're dealing with to be able to go through that. So I think that's an important piece.
Dean, how important is it for a coach, when you were talking about the self-awareness and self-regulation, and oftentimes coaches have this huge desire to see that change in other people, but how important it is for us or for coaches to get coaching on that for themselves? I mean, we talk about that, but is that almost more important in some cases than actually doing it for other people?
Yeah, I think you are your own best laboratory, right? So, every coach that I know that's worth their salt has a coach. I mean, it's just the truth, right? Is that you've got to be on a pathway to a development pathway as well, and you've got to be developing your talents into strengths, and with all the foibles. It's funny. I don't know. When I was younger, I used to think about development, and it just used to bother me that, I was like, why can't it just be pretty all the time? Why can't I not have any big failings or big mistakes or big blind spots that rear their ugly head? Why does development always involve that? And it's just the nature of it, right? I mean, there's great moments, and then there's just horrible, tragic moments, right? You know, with all the emotions and the drama and the excitement and everything that kind of goes with it, right? And so part of it is you know, you're your own best laboratory, so you need to be recognizing these developmental milestones in yourself and pressing yourself to be able to do that. And typically, I would tell you the best coaches I know and some of the best leaders I know are people that they have their own coaches, right? And they're getting coached either in formal relationships with coaches or informal ones with peers or mentors or role models who are giving them that kind of coaching and helping them confront those things. So I think that's really important. And part of what our intent here is in doing this, so why are we doing this now? You know, we want to be able, as I said at the top of the hour, we want to be able to start to distinguish these kind of moments, right? We want to be able to distinguish these kind of milestones so that when you're in them, you recognize them. Oh, yeah, that's what I'm dealing with right now. A moment of self-expression, self-regulation, right? Oh, that's what I'm dealing with right now. I've got a choice in front of me to really focus on my strengths, right? And be intentional about investing in this area of talent, right? And yeah, you know, and like that. And as coaches, to be able to recognize those moments in other people and to be able to help other people through them. Again, I'm going to give a shameless plug. One of the things we're going to talk about in that one-day Advanced Strengths coaching course is we're going to talk about these 7 areas, right? And we're going to talk about kind of practical stuff you do with people that help kind of synthesize and catalyze those moments so you can recognize those moments and you can start to work with them. So, you know, obviously this is a hot topic. We're working on this, and we think this is important, and I think it'll help us as we continue to think about curriculum for coaches and curriculum to develop people to be able to help make sure that for all of us we're teaching the right stuff. So, JB, I couldn't agree more. I love your comment about sometimes those tragic moments open the door to great moments, though. Absolutely. You know, you learn from those. I will tell you that for a lot of people that I know, and particularly a lot of leaders I know, you know, they learn much more from their failures than their successes. And one of the things we know from our succession research, and broadly from succession research in the marketplace, is that most great leaders have an early moment of failure that helps kind of coalesce their leadership talent, right? So, like that. So.
Well, that failure strips off sometimes that exterior of you know, the falsehood of who we think we are.
Right.
And it really exposes that and brings that truth, you know, that truth to light, and then you go, oh, I really am that way, and I should actually do something about it instead of kind of fake it for the rest of my life. So
yeah, and I can confront, you know, part of, if you never want to fail, you can't develop. Right? If you're resisting failure, you'll never have the risk. One of my favorite quotes of all time is the Winston Churchill quote where he said, "Success is moving from failure to failure with great enthusiasm." I just love that. I think that's wonderful. Yeah. So, hey, Jim, before we wrap, I know we're almost at the top of the hour here. I'd like to give one more plug for something that we're doing. Many coaches have talked to us about the Q12 and how they incorporate employee engagement in their practice. Okay, so I want you to know about this thing that we're doing this summer. We are testing, so we've had a course that we built called the Engagement Champions course that we do inside organizations to help train people it's inside organizations that use the Q12 as their engagement metric. This course trains people to be a coach and a resource for managers and somebody that can train others in the use of engagement, train managers in the use of engagement inside their organization. The course is called Creating an Engaging Workplace for Engagement Champions, right? Again, creating an engaging workplace for engagement champions. So we've had this course. We do it inside organizations. This summer, we're trying a little experiment. Right? So here we are trying a little experiment. We're offering it as an open enrollment course for the first time. And we've been debating and discussing probably for 8 months, should we do this, should we not do this, like that. We're offering it for the first time. Our first one is June 7th and 8th in Omaha. We've got a second one in August. It's in early August. I don't know the dates off the top of my head. If you go to courses.gallup.com, they're there. If you'd like to participate in this, we're trying to. One of the things we'd like is we know that eventually, if and when we decide to roll out this course, we'll have a number of strengths coaches who will want to take it. We had one woman, great woman, Nicole, who is a strengths coach. She's in Michigan. She's originally from Germany. She came and did our high performance management course because she was trying to get an education around employee engagement. Right? That's probably not the right course to do if you want that. Right? The right course to do is this Engagement Champions course. So if this is something you're interested in, it may not be, but if it's something you're interested in, we're doing a pilot of it this summer. The first week of June, the first week of August, go sign up for it. There's a limited number of seats available. So if it's something that's part of your practice, something you're interested in, this is an opportunity to both participate in something valuable and meaningful. The materials for it are phenomenal, I will tell you. We had a great team work on those, and that it's a great opportunity to be able to get some unique education and to give us some feedback about how to open this up and whether it makes sense. So if it's something you're interested in, I'd love to have you participate in that.
Great. Dean, a lot of great information today, and I'll remind folks, it's to go back, we had a previous version of this available as well, available on our coaches blog. Just go to coaching.gallup.com. Or if you just Google Dean Jones, right? That you're gonna come right to the top, Dean, right?
I hope not.
Maybe Gallup Dean Jones.
Yeah.
That'll get you there as well. We'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available out of the Gallup Strength Center, gallupstrengthcenter.com. Send us your questions or comments in an email, coaching@gallup.com. If you haven't, Dean mentioned a lot of courses. We have a brand new courses site. It's courses.gallup.com. We kind of make that easy for you to remember. A lot of information out there. If you go to our coaches blog, which is just coaching.gallup.com, if you want to head out there, the links to our YouTube group, our YouTube page, Facebook group, iTunes, and RSS feeds. If you want to listen to this on your phone, iPhone and Android apps are available for you. Everything's out there. That's a great place to start. Coaching.gallup.com. And don't forget, Dean also mentioned the Clifton Strengths Summit coming up July 18th through the 20th. There's still some time to get an early bird discount if you listen to this in the next 10 days. So jump over there, CliftonStrengthsSummit.com will get you to it. Lots of information. By the way, if you're listening to this on YouTube and you're ever like, hey, I got to go back, just hit pause, go back a little bit, and you can get it again. It's right there for you. If you found this helpful, we'd ask that you please share it, and we'll look forward to the next Call to Coach. And thanks for coming out, Dean. Always great to have you. Lots of great information. We'll see Dean in 2 months. Thanks for coming out, everybody. Goodbye.